Hello everyone again. The Café has become an important part of my life. I've been a member for 3 years. I also enjoy the writing class. I am privileged to introduce to you the visionary of the Recovery Café. Her dreams have become a reality through the Café. And every time I speak with her, she fills me with a little bit more hope and light. Here's Killian No.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, President Sheev, for scheduling your departure at such a time that we could all be together. Several months ago, the United States drug czar, Michael Botticelli, paid Recovery Café a visit. We were struck by his kind, gentle spirit, which seemed incongruent with the need to be accompanied by 4 buff, armed federal marshals. Now, normally, you are not allowed to enter Recovery Café if you're packing. The drug czar asked us, how did you know to create a long-term healing community 10 years before the research would prove that long-term communities are crucial in addressing addiction and co-occurring disorders? What we knew then and what we know now is that all of us need a place to heal when we are desperately ill. All of us need a community where we are both known and loved. All of us need some structure of loving accountability if we're to become all we were created to become. All of us need a place to contribute to the lives of others. That's what Recovery Café provides for women and men who most often are ignored by the larger culture. John was a member of Recovery Café from 2008 to 2010. He established a foundation in recovery from homelessness, bipolar disorder, and alcoholism. He went back to school. He started meditating every day and walking every day, and he lost 52 pounds. He was funny and full of life. But when he graduated from school, he no longer had his student health insurance. So he wasn't able to perform or to pay for his prescription meds. His mental health took a nosedive. He began to self-medicate. He didn't show up for his recovery circle. And so Bart and I showed up at his apartment. We knocked and knocked, no response. So we called 911, and when the first responders got into his apartment, they treated him with gentleness and respect. As they loaded him into the ambulance, John was sobbing and saying, I never wanted you to see me like this. We trusted John was in good hands, and he was, and we planned to check in with him the next day at the hospital. But for some reason, John was not admitted to the hospital that night. What we know is that he was released a few hours later, and the next day, he was dead. I have gone over the events leading up to John's death over and over and over in my mind. At every step of the way, Recovery Café made a compassionate response. But compassionate responses are not always enough. We must also work to change broken systems that exclude any part of the human family. We deny the oneness of the human family at our own peril. This is hard to believe, but the nation's annual deaths to suicide, about 41,000, and drug overdose, about 44,000, equal all American combat deaths in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. It's also hard to believe that half of the women and men incarcerated in this country are there for a nonviolent drug offense, and that 70% of all women in state penitentiaries and 50% of all men in state penitentiaries suffer from a mental health condition. That is not only cruel, it is ridiculously costly. It costs way more to ignore or incarcerate than to treat and restore. We must be willing to confront any system or structure in our society, economic, governmental, social, or religious, any system that undergirds inequality. Compassionate responses and confrontation of unjust systems responsible for growing inequality must go together. They are two sides of the same coin. Without a commitment from both government and compassionate organizations and individuals like you, without public and private partnerships, the gap between those who have what they need to fulfill their potential and live healthy lives and those who do not will continue to widen. What gives me hope are programs like Drug Court and Recovery Café. As you know, or you may know, Recovery Café has helped start other recovery cafes in other cities, and we're currently working with 7 more groups seeking to replicate the model. Our deepest desire is that the Recovery Café model will somehow help transform the larger mental health and criminal justice systems, and that longer-term healing, compassionate communities will become the new normal in how we treat the mentally ill in this country. There is some movement on that front, thanks to leaders like Jim Vollendroff representing King County, Dan Floyd representing King County, and Vince Collins representing the state of Washington. Thank you. I'd like to close by reminding all of us of 4 spiritual practices that could help us confront the gaps in ourselves so that we might more passionately confront the gaps in our world. The first practice, we can commit to spending some amount of time each day in silence, or in some contemplative practice that helps us cross the terrain from our heads to our hearts. Most of us live in our heads, and we need some daily practice to help us disconnect from the incessant mental activity and reconnect with our hearts. Second practice, we can commit to pursuing at least one authentic relationship with someone who suffers day in and day out, the degradation of poverty and the dire consequences of inadequate mental and physical health care, inadequate housing, and inadequate education. We must let our hearts break over the suffering of others. The Dalai Lama reminds us, any change of mind begins with a change of heart. Third practice, we can commit to closing the gap between our denial of our own mortality and the acceptance that our lives are brief and that only what we do for others, only what we do for love lasts beyond our brief lives. The Sufi poet Rumi put it this way: with life as short as a half-taken breath, don't plant anything but love. I'm talking about what Henry David Thoreau called deliberate living, and we don't have to retreat to the woods to live more deliberately. Living more deliberately with an awareness of our own mortality could shift some of the ways we consume material goods and cling to resources. Living more deliberately might free us up to love our suffering brothers and sisters more deeply and to live more like we belong to each other. And finally, and I know I say this all the time, so feel free to just mouth the words along with me. We can put our weight down with at least one organization committed to compassionate responses and helping to create more just, caring systems so that everyone has a place to heal, a place to belong, and a place to become all they were created to become. Thank you for being here.